All right, welcome back to the beautiful Pacific Northwest, land of Platte and Coffee and PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and today we're going to be chatting with Donnie. Donnie's going to share some of his awesome encounters out here that he has had. And you hear me okay, Donnie?
I hear you loud and clear.
All right, thank you, sir. So I was going to do some introductions and some other things, some updates from PacWest Bigfoot, but I have to tell you, I talked to Donnie before, listened to his encounter story, and I have to tell you, I just want to dive into this one today because it was absolutely fascinating. It was great. It's actually one of my favorites today. So Donnie, go ahead. I know that you had I guess a couple experiences, was it?
It was, I'm going to call it one experience. I mean, it occurred over a few days,
Hmm.
but I really didn't catch on, I don't believe, until I heard at this point, I have no other, belief except for I had what people would call a vocalization. Once
Okay.
I had that, suddenly everything started falling into place. And I'm to the point now. I can't make excuses for. I can't explain away many of the things that happened. So
Hmm. Okay.
yes, so
And
things were happening. I had the vocalization, and then it tied it all together.
nice. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and let you take us through the vocalizations and into, I believe it was a visual encounter, right?
I saw something.
Okay.
so
Well, why don't you take
so
us through that? Give us all of it, everything that you were doing that day. And if you don't mind sharing, basically a general area of where this happened.
okay. Um, this is going to be about 2015, I believe it was. I had just moved into a one bedroom in a little place called Camas Valley, Oregon, which is on the way out, halfway out to the coast. It's in the
Hmm.
coastal range. And when I moved there, it's a very large house that the property owner has, but they had sectioned off several of the rooms downstairs so they could rent them out. Property owner was never there, and I'm under the impression that nobody had been living there for a while. So when I came there, I came on the property. It was on, I believe it was 80 acres, and pretty secluded. Loved it, really fit into my lifestyle, and moved in. I remember midnight on a Saturday night. Not a big deal. Went to church the next day. Uh, the the following evening, so we're looking at Monday evening. I was sitting in the living room, and I was watching some TV, and I heard. Now again, this is a large house, and I just have a little corner of the lower level of this house rented out. It sounded like somebody had slammed a car door, which surprised me. I was the only one there, but I thought, well, maybe the owner, who was living in California, maybe the owner came up for a visit. And I waited for about 5 minutes, and I didn't hear anything else. So I got up and I walked around the building, and there was nothing there. I thought, boy, that's strange. I could have swore I heard a car door. It actually, you could actually feel the vibration of the house,
Hmm.
and wasn't alarmed at all. Again, out in the woods, a lot of deer were coming through there. I had a motion light, um, so I thought, well, maybe somebody pulled it onto the driveway and realized they were at the wrong place and turned around and left. And so
Mm.
I didn't get too concerned about that. Went to work the next day, and I don't remember, was it the next day? Was it 2 days after? I'm not remembering exact days, but it was shortly after that. I'm a bow hunter, so I remember this was in about mid-August. So it was just before bow season, and I had my target set up out in the back, and I went in the backyard, and I was going to just practice a little. And up in the woods, I heard what sounded like gibberish. Now I wasn't too concerned. I had only been there a few days, and I still wasn't sure where all the neighbors were. Where
Mm.
from my place. you couldn't see anything. It was just trees. Trees had a small orchard on the property, about 75 yards out the back door. It got real brushy and it went up onto the hill. But I heard somebody back there, wasn't really concerned about it. You know, it's not uncommon to hear people out in the brush. And I remember one of the times I went to retrieve my arrows, and I was listening to it, and it wasn't English. And, you know, here in America, typically if you hear another language, typically it's Spanish. And I've heard enough of Spanish that I knew that it wasn't Spanish, but it was really, really garbled. It was strange. I don't want to say they were trying to play a game, but it was like, it was just really garbled. It was distinct in the sense that, and it sounded like there was two. It was very distinct in the sense that it sounded like they were actually talking to each other, but it sounded like total gibberish. And I had no idea who in the world is up there. So
nice.
No. Yeah, it was kind of strange, but I wasn't too concerned about it. I thought, well, no big deal. And that night, once again, I was watching TV, getting ready to go to bed, and this time something hit the house, and it shook. It absolutely shook the building. So it was, you know, a few nights before I thought I heard a door slam, which is on the far side of the house. Now this is on one of the walls, and it shook everything. And the porch light came on, and I jumped up and grabbed the flashlight, looked out the door. I didn't see anything. Walked around the edge of the building, still didn't see anything. Walked to the front of the house. There was nothing there, and I didn't smell anything. I didn't see anything. I had a very, very, very bright LED light, and I was looking up the driveway, and I heard what sounded like what can only be described as a laugh, but it wasn't like ha ha ha, but it was like it was at first I thought there was a kid out there laughing at me, which really ticked me off. So my thought was, you know, no one's been here. Kids are probably coming out here making out, you know, or whatever kids do. And now there's somebody out there and they're playing games. That was my thought. But I remembered that it wasn't, my initial impression was it was a laugh. But the more I thought of it, it's like, that wasn't a laugh. That was almost like that gibberish that I heard. And I kind of tied the two together in the sense that whoever was doing the gibberish talking up in the woods, that must have been who hit the side of my house. And I was pretty upset. I was, you know, I was out in the country. I was looking for some peace and quiet, and I don't want kids playing around. Now, Camas Valley is pretty remote.
Yeah, I've got a map up here right now, as you can see.
Okay, it's not remote like Alaska calls remote, but for the lower 48, it's you know, you're out in the woods. There's a few ranchers around, and the piece of property that I was on still didn't know where the neighbors were. So went to sleep, no other issues. Next day, the landlord called up, and she was asking, you know, have you settled in? How do you like it? I said, love it. And we were talking about the different fruit trees on the property and what I can pick, and she didn't want me shooting at the deer. She's named all the deer, and I'm thinking, yeah, that one.
Yeah, they're from California.
That one. Yeah. Anyway, that was. I never did shoot anything on the property. They were all does basically that came on the property. But I mentioned, I said, yeah, I could hear the neighbor. I was kind of surprised, and she said, the neighbor. I said, well, yeah, and I described where it was, and she said, that just goes up on the hill where you're describing. That's not. There's no neighbors there. And then she got a little upset, and she goes, "You are the only person out there that has the right to be on that property. So if there's somebody on that property, you have my permission to tell them that they have to get off." And and I said, "Okay, that's fine." So I would say within the next few days, I actually walked out there because I wanted to see, were they cutting wood? For those listening to this and who don't live in Oregon, we get a lot of seasonal mushroom pickers.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them are Oriental. And I thought maybe it's some Oriental mushroom picker. I don't know what grows in August. August and mushrooms don't sound like they go together, but it was just a thought. Yeah, it was a thought. Maybe that's what it was. And again, middle of August, we're sneaking up toward archery season. One of the things that I would do is before I'd go to work, I worked a swing shift, and before I'd go to work, I would go for a walk. And it was typically 4 miles, and there was a logging road that I would walk to, and it was behind the property. And when I walked through the property to see if I could find anything, which I didn't, I didn't find anything, but when I walked through the property, I realized that it was probably 200 yards to the trees, and then there was kind of an open meadow, and then I could see the road that I liked. It was an old logging road that I like to walk on. And so I'd walk up that logging road, and this one particular day, and this is where I started tying the whole thing together. I'm walking up that road, and David, I told you the approximate location of where that was at.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it again here. I think it was, where are those spots up? Wildcat Drive, right?
Yeah, Wildcat Road. And then toward the end of it, there's a like a
BLM roads. Yeah. Here it is.
Yeah.
I remember now, because there was a kind of a split off a Y. There it is. There's the Y. It's like Deep Creek and all that up there.
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
And
because then you got the
So where I would walk, I'd get to that Y, and I'd go to the left, and that winds around. It's a nicer walk.
Right to clear
so
cut.
I'm walking. Yeah, right there. You're going through a clear cut just before you kind of duck back into some trees and then go up the hill. But I was probably, I'm going to guess, 70, maybe 50 yards to the left of that Y. And I was walking. Really wasn't. And actually, I take my bow and I stump shoot. I shoot at clods of dirt and just to keep honing my skills. And as I was walking, there was a noise, and it was so loud. And this is where I really trip up, because I try to explain this to people, and the few people that actually listen, no matter what I say, I can't do it justice. It sounded like it was about 3 feet behind me, and after these few years of thinking about this situation almost every day, the only way I can describe it is it sounded like a gorilla. When I heard it, it sounded like it was about 3 feet behind me. I spun around thinking I'm a dead man. I wasn't thinking anything. I wasn't. My thoughts were on elk and deer. I think I also had a bear tag. That's where my mind was at, was elk and deer primarily. This noise was so loud, it actually shook me. And I spun around, and there was nothing there. When I turned around, so I had the road, and then there was like a little bit of a grassy hill, and I could still see the Y. Beyond that little grassy hill, about 150 yards away, maybe 200 yards away, there was a pretty substantial hill, and it was covered in virgin timber. and I think they've logged it since then. But it was real thick virgin timber Douglas firs, which is kind of a shaggy looking tree. And I sat there and I was just holding my breath. I was alarmed. I wouldn't say I was scared. I wasn't ready to run, but I didn't want to move either. Whatever it was, I needed to hear which direction it was coming from. And I probably waited 5 more seconds. And this time it made that noise like a gorilla. And that's the only thing I can liken it to. 3 times. And it came from that hill, and I don't know how to explain it to you. All I can see, it was real. It sounded like the thing was in my face, but I could tell that sound was coming from that hill, which is, again, 150, 200 yards away.
Mm-hmm.
The sound was so unbelievably loud. And if I was alarmed at anything, is the second time I heard it, it absolutely sounded like it was enraged. It wasn't. It sounded angry, and whatever it was unbelievably loud, and you could hear the rage in its voice. And I stood there. I mean, chills were going up and down my spine. I'm thinking, this bow is not going to help me, whatever that thing is. And I sat there and listened and listened. I did, just holding my breath. Eventually, I noticed it's like there were still birds flitting around. But I have to admit, that was the first time that I actually stopped and considered, did I just hear a Bigfoot? So real quick in my mind, I'm going through my entire repertoire of bear. No, that's not a bear. Elk, not even close to an elk. Deer don't make much noise, but it's not that. And I'm thinking coyotes, no, not even close. But what was so definitive, so distinctive about this is its volume. And that's honestly, and I think the word haunt is overly used to the point it sounds cliche. But that the sheer volume and the sheer rage in that sound is what haunts me. So I stayed there, I'm going to guess maybe another 2-3 minutes, just not moving. And eventually I kind of calmed down, kind of shook it off. And all of my life, when I was a kid, I mean, when you're raised in the Pacific Northwest, you hear about Bigfoot. I mean, it's the world's greatest campfire story. I mean, it's just, as a little kid, you're off. You got dad there, and dad's like, and you're safe, but you love hearing these stories.
Yeah.
And I remember as a little kid, one time I asked my dad, is there a Bigfoot? And my dad thought there was. And well, do you think he's out there? And he would say, and of course my dad, he called me Donald. He said, Donald, I wouldn't even worry about it. I bet you if there's one out there, he's probably seen you 50 times. You never knew he was there. And I've always found comfort in that. And it's like cougars. A lot of people get upset about cougars, and no telling how many times I've been in the woods and cougars have watched me walk by. So I shook it off and I said, okay, I'm not sure what that was, but I kept going. So I finished my walk. I went up to the top of the hill, came back. When I got to that area again, stopped, probably stayed there about 5 minutes, didn't hear anything. And what I did was, because I had taken so long waiting to hear further noise, I realized I was going to be late for work. Again, I was working swing shift. So I cut down through the field, through the trees, and then into the backyard.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Got dressed, went back to work. So I got off work at close to midnight. And by the time I got home, it was 12:45 in the morning. And usually, again, working swing, when I get home, I take probably 30 minutes to unwind or whatnot, watch a little TV. And while I was getting ready, the porch light came on. Well, I had grown accustomed to this because there was a lot of deer that walked through the yard, and they'd walk right past the house and look at me. Then they'd go over and start munching on the apples.
No, I've got that problem here. I'm right on the edge of like town, and I'm telling you, they're in my front yard. They're on the street. They're everywhere.
Yeah, I came up with an adage that it's if you can name the deer, it's no longer considered hunting. I've looked at it like, yeah, you know what, you're just as delicious as the one up on the mountain, but I just can't do it. Okay, so they'd bring their their fawns over, and
yeah.
So the porch light came on. I peeked out the door and I looked, and I didn't see anything. And I thought, well, that's what turned that on? So I stepped out the porch and had the porch light still on. Porch light probably stuck out from the wall, maybe, I don't know, 8 inches. So if you put your back right up against the wall, you really didn't have that assault from the light shining in your eyes.
Hmm.
And it was a warm evening, and I leaned up against the wall and I was looking around, didn't see anything. And about 75 yards away, I looked up at the tree line and I saw something. And I looked, and this thing was absolutely massive. It was so large. My initial thought was that's a stump. I would have to guess that it was probably 4.5 to 5 feet wide. And I looked at this thing, and the more I looked at it, I could see what at 1:30 in the morning really looked a lot like the silhouette of a head and shoulder. And I'm staring, of course, and I have to admit, my mind is going back to what happened earlier that morning when I heard these sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm staring at this thing, and in my mind, I'm trying to go through everything in the backyard. So I don't remember a stump there. Now, this is about 75 yards off to the tree line, and all I have is that motion light. So I can see the trees, but I can't see detail. And I can see this thing, but I can't really see detail. I can see a vague outline, and that's about it. And I'm looking at this thing, and the more I look, it's like that thing has a shape to it. And I looked, it's like, good grief, that looks like, it looks like a gorilla. And of course, a nanosecond later, I said, Bigfoot. And I sat there and stared at it, and it didn't move. So I watched it for, I don't know, about a minute. And I really started kind of looking at its proportions. And based on its proportions, if that's what I saw, if that was a Bigfoot, this thing had to be sitting down. It was so wide, if the thing would have stood, and just so you know, later, when the sun came out, I went out there and measured. And, I found some landmarks on some trees and measured, and this thing would have been just under 10 feet tall if it would have stood up. And again, that's a guess. 1:30 in the morning, I'm looking at trees in the dark, trying to find a stick or something to gauge. So
yeah,
how accurate is that? Probably not real accurate, but it was big. And I looked at this thing, and I thought, I started getting a little bit shook up, but it didn't move. It was so motionless, to the point I started to relax. And I thought, that's got to be a stump. That's got to be a stump I just don't remember seeing there. Well, about that time, my porch light goes out. So now I can't see. So I reach in the door. I turn the porch light back on. It's still there. And I'm waiting, and a doe, she comes walking around the corner of the house. She looks at me, hesitates for a minute, and she walks over to the apple tree, which is almost half the distance between me and this object. And she glances at the object, and then puts her head down, and she starts munching on an apple. Well, I'm watching this. Okay, now, with this in my mind, I'm going through all of the stories. Again, raised in the Northwest, so I'm very familiar with Bigfoot, the Bigfoot stories. And in my mind, I'm going to, I've heard all the stories. Suddenly people would say suddenly, the birds wouldn't sing, or there's always this precursor. There's always some element, I guess, that makes it a little more spooky. I don't know. But there she is. She glanced at it and, without a care in the world, started eating an apple. So in my mind, I'm thinking, that can't be anything but a stump, because she is not alarmed. And I continue to watch, and you know how it is in the dark. You've got a light. You're looking at something in the distance, and you stare at it hard enough and long enough, your eyes start playing tricks on you.
Yeah.
It's like you start cross-eyed.
Yeah.
And I'm looking, and there would be times I would almost make out a brow line, like a brow ridge. There was no eye shine. People have asked me, well, was there eye shine? No, I didn't see eye shine. It did not fall within the normal parameters of most of the Bigfoot sightings or stories that you hear. Deer are fine, birds are fine, no eye shine. This thing didn't move, didn't sway. It just sat there. So I thought, you know what? I'm just going to sit here. If that's real, I'm going to have a staring contest. And I did. I wouldn't take my eyes off it. I stared. I'm going to guess 5 minutes. And after about 5 minutes, I thought, this is stupid. That's got to be a stump. That's got to be something. And I'm getting tired. So went back in the house, decided to turn the TV off, and I was getting ready to actually go to my room and go to sleep. And I turned the living room light off. I turned around, looked, and I noticed the porch light, which it had gone off, came back on. So I went back just to look to see if I keep hoping for a big buck to walk in the backyard. Never did happen. And the doe's gone. Yeah, my luck. The doe's gone. And then I opened up the door and I looked, and whatever was there was gone. It was no longer there. And that was the first time I actually felt fear in the whole thing. It didn't last long. I've got my own guns. I wasn't overly concerned, but whatever was there, whatever I was staring at, was clearly gone. You could see the trees. Once again, you could see the trees all the way to the ground. Again, not detailed, but you could tell the silhouettes all the way to the ground. And I sat there almost like the breath had been sucked out of my lungs, and I stared at it, and I thought, oh my gosh, something was really there. And the grass of the yard went out about 40 yards to where the apple tree was, where that deer was. And I grabbed my light, I shined it around, and I walked out to the edge of the grass. And once you get to the edge of the grass, you start getting into blackberries and brambles and lots of sticks, a lot of blowdown sticks. They had logged out once upon a time, and they never really did clean it up, so it was a mess. And I walked out to the edge, and I looked, not taking my eyes off, and I could see, of course, now that I walked out there, I could see a little more definition. But I could see every one of those trees all the way to the ground. And okay, now I mentioned that I hunt. When you're walking through the woods, you can have a squirrel. A squirrel will break a stick, and you can just by the pitch, you can tell that stick is probably smaller than a pencil. And so when I'm elk hunting, if I hear an elk, a lot of times they break a lot bigger things. Something snapped. It wasn't a quick snap. It was, if I were to guess, it was off in the direction of that trail that I came down earlier in the day. But I heard something snap. It was a stick. If I were to guess, I would guess that thing had to be close to 2 inches in diameter. That is a guess. But it was the pitch, it's the tone.
Yeah.
I'm a typical boy in the Northwest growing up. I'm beating everything up with sticks. So after
Me
a while,
too.
you become a little bit of a connoisseur of sticks, but I could tell this was big, and I could tell something was moving away. And I backed up. I thought, whatever it is, if that was a Bigfoot, I'm sure he could close the distance quicker than I could get back to the house.
Mm-hmm.
So I literally backed up to the house, got in the house, and turned the lights off. Grabbed a gun. I did. I grabbed my 45-70, and I figured if there is something in it, and I did have an event, I want to at least have something big enough that's going to, offer some protection.
Mm-hmm.
Went to bed that night, and I would say about 4:30 in the morning, I woke up and I heard that gibberish just outside the house. That same gibberish type language just outside. And I sat up. Now, what I haven't told is at the time I had just gone through a divorce. I didn't have anything. I was sleeping on an air mattress.
Yeah.
And so I'm on the floor. I sit up and I kind of slowly stand up, and I'm looking, and I have the gun. I'm looking out my bedroom window. I don't see anything, but I heard that gibberish talk. It sounded irritated, but it was not. It was no language that I recognized. And when I opened up the bedroom door, the porch light was on again. Peeked out there. Now, normally, who cares if the porch light's on? Usually, there's deer walking back and forth on the property all the time. But now I'm very alarmed. Let me turn my radio on. So I peeked out the door. I didn't even stick my head out. I just looked out the window. Didn't see anything. Wasn't real eager to go throwing the door open and running out in the dark. But I stayed awake. I was nervous enough that I stayed awake until the sun came up. And I never had that year. I never had another situation happen. I can say the following year, about the same time, it was late July, early August.
Mm-hmm.
I heard that same language up on the hill behind the house. So again, Dave, when you and I first talked, and for those who care to listen to this story, the way this whole thing happened is I didn't give credence to any of this stuff until I heard the vocalization. Once I heard the vocalization, yeah, I had to backtrack. I was like, wait a minute, maybe those aren't kids playing games in the yard. So we had another tenant move in. He was an older gentleman, retired, real quiet guy, and it was his first time living out in the country. I never told him about anything, but we now had two people out there. And I still went to work almost every day, and there were several times I came home, and he would come out the next morning when I'd wake up. He'd come out and say, "Hey, I think there's somebody up in the trees. Is there another house up there?" And I say, "No, there's no other houses." And so he would hear the same thing. He says, "It's not Spanish, but they're up there talking." And so that is pretty much the events that happened. I told a few people, and again, those who are listening to this, there's a wildlife park down the mountain called Wildlife Safari.
Yep.
And
I was just over there about a month and a half ago with the kids.
Okay, and they got cheetahs and they got lions out there, and they got some neat things. Mm-hmm. So when I told a couple of guys at work what had happened, and they said, "Well, maybe a gorilla got out. Wildlife Safari is just down the hill." I don't know if they have a gorilla.
No, we would all know if there had been.
Yeah,
I was living here at the time. As a matter of fact, 2015, I was living on the mountaintop, way up a road called San Souci, at the very, very top of it, overlooking a whole valley in the back of that, which led out that way.
Okay.
So yeah, no, there was nothing like that.
I know they're real. I know they're real big on they're real proud of their cheetah breeding program,
Yeah,
and that's but when I would mention this, I was always met with a little bit of scoffing, just kind of
oh yeah.
chuckles and well, you know how they are in Camas Valley, they see things. They said it once upon a time had the reputation of being Cannabis Valley, and so I got tired of that, and I just shut up about it.
Yeah.
Now, admittedly, growing up here in the Pacific Northwest, I've always wanted to see. I love the mystery. I do believe it's real because I've known some people who they just wouldn't lie. It's not their nature to make
Hmm.
stories up. So in my own mind, there's enough for me to believe in it. But I always, I kind of in my mind, I imagined if I ever had an encounter, you kind of imagine what that would be like.
Hmm.
Um, the two things that blew me away was the sheer volume and rage. When something's 150 yards to 200 yards away and it sounds like it's 3 feet in front of you, like it's in your face yelling at you, that sucked the breath right out of my lungs.
Yeah.
And then this thing, and again, there was one time, no eye shine. At one time, I thought I saw kind of this brow ridge, but I blinked my eyes, and of course I couldn't see straight again, and it was dark. But what really took me back was how wide this thing was, how massive. In my mind, I guess I didn't imagine that. I guess I imagined big and husky, not, and I hate to use the word monstrous,
Hmm.
but I wasn't expecting that. And it was enough. It was enough of a departure from what I thought I would see if I ever had an encounter, that it really took me back. It has really made me second guess a lot of things. A couple people have asked, well, did you smell anything? No, I didn't smell anything. Did you find any footprints? No, it was August. A lot of the
Yeah, it's pretty
up
dry
there,
out this way.
it's real dry. The
Yeah.
dirt is like cement.
Yeah, especially
Um,
here in Southern Oregon, people get this huge thing about the Pacific Northwest being this just rainy, wet, damp place. Southern Oregon is kind of, I don't know if people know this, it's kind of like a banana belt. I mean, we get all 4 seasons. And the summers here are actually, in the upper 80s, lower 90s, and they're pretty dry. So
yeah,
usually dry. So,
yeah. I've since moved further north. I'm up here pretty close to this. I live up on the McKenzie River outside of Springfield, and yeah, today is your typical Western Oregon rainy.
mhm.
Noah was a wimp. He complained about 40 days and 40 nights of rain.
Oh,
It does
yeah.
that all the time here.
Yeah. Yeah. Welcome to Oregon.
Yeah, but but no footprints. You know, I've had people say, "Well, did you look for hair?" No, I wasn't looking for hair samples. I I was still trying to wrap my mind around the sheer how broad this thing was, how
Yeah.
loud this thing was, and um, so that is pretty much it. It wasn't much longer. Absolutely met the absolute most amazing person in my life, my wife, and I've told her the story, and she's listened with. She's about the only person who's actually listened without smirking at me,
Mhm.
and you. Of course, you're on the radio. I can't see you, but she's been great. We've moved, and um, the place that I live, a lot of people would consider, just a great area for. In fact, finding Bigfoot. They've done some shows up at Ike's Pizza up out of Leesburg, Oregon. I'm
Yeah.
pretty close to that. In fact, we had pizza there about a week ago,
Yeah.
and but where I'm at, there's enough people around. I have no hopes of seeing anything. But that event, the events that I've explained to you, and again, I don't want this word to sound cliche, but they haunt me.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I would love to say that I saw this big hairy thing walking across the meadow and, you know, with a elk underneath one arm. I would love to say that, but I can't. All I can tell you is there was something up there. I have no doubt of that. Whatever this thing was, it was the sheer volume. It's the lung capacity on this thing. It was like, say, if you've ever heard a gorilla, you know, kind of do its ooh, 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 like that.
Yeah.
That's what it did. The
Yeah,
first
I've
time
heard
it was
that.
two,
I've heard that at Wildlife Safari. I've heard that. Yeah.
and so, and the sheer mass of this thing. And again, I went out there the next day, and you know, and in my mind, I'm thinking, well, what if I did see something? I took a tape measure out there, kind of did some rough figuring, realized the tape measure was useless because it was all guesswork. But again, I would say a very educated guess. I would call it close to just under 10 feet, if that thing stood up. But whatever it was either kneeling down or sitting down and completely motionless. So
Yeah, that's
that
you
is
know,
it.
I have a another encounter in there that a friend of mine, Mike, had back east, and it was sitting there. It was just sitting there motionless until it did move its head eventually and moved its head to the side a little. But it just sat there, and it was like staring in the direction of him and his family, just
Okay.
sitting there. And he said it just sat there, and it looked like a big, massive, just gorilla monkey thing. And it was
Okay.
just, yeah. So yeah, I
And
know that one.
and that's what this. And, you know, when you read the reports, you know, you can go through reports, and a lot of times you read through them, you're like, yeah, I'm not buying that one. That one sounds promising, and yeah, that one's kind of weird. But you know, there's a lot of times you hear about them swaying,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, a little bit of noise here in just a sec. But anyway, those of you that know, I work for the railroad, so I got trains around here. At least I
Nice.
know they're around here because I can see the tracks.
Mm.
That's a joke. That's a joke. So, okay, it's a bad railroader joke. I get it. But
Nice.
anyway, so yeah. So I think in my situation, I was looking for that textbook situation, the little oddities that you
Yeah.
hear so many people talk about, and it didn't. You know, the deer could care less. There were still the little birds, the little chickadees were flitting around when I heard the noise. I
Mm.
didn't smell anything, no eye shine, wasn't swaying. Um, but I can tell you that there was something massive there on the tree line. It was probably sitting down or kneeling down, and it was gone within 5 minutes after I walked back in the house.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
even
Well,
now,
thanks,
told
man.
I actually I was actually kind of hoping that getting this out would kind of help me sort things out, and now I find myself still with 1,000 questions rolling through my
Yeah, a
mind.
million more questions. Yep.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
usually how it goes. Even me, I'll be sharing my stuff out this December on what I experienced. I mean, I have an interview out there, but um, it does. It just brings about like a million more questions, you know,
it
and
does.
yeah. And it's just
It
something
does.
that, I mean, that's why I started doing the Bigfoot encounter stories in the first place, writing, you know, my own and some friends of mine. It just kind of helped us to kind of process everything, but also it did give us a lot
Yeah,
more questions, but it helped us to understand what we went through, and is just kind of why I did that in the first place. And it just, it is what it is today. So,
I, I have to admit, it's turned into a little bit of. Remember in the old days, they, you had the Little Orphanandy and the radio
hmm
programs that would come, and
yeah.
everybody did rather. Lately, that's been our little family. We turned the TV off, and we've been turning on yours, and we've been listening to you read these encounters.
Oh, thanks, man.
And oh, it's been great. My wife, she's enjoying it. There was one where a guy got taken, and so my wife, she says, "I'm never going to the mountains again," and I laugh at her. So it's I think his name
That
was
was a
Peter. She goes,
report that I read about, gosh, and I had met, I went to this like Bigfoot thing, and I'd met a guy who had um, known the folks that were involved in that. And he kind of told me what he knew. I took what I could from the reports. And then, of course, you know what I do? I create these kind of backstories into those to create that based on true story. And I'll tell you what, that one does, it creeps me out, you know,
mm-hmm.
and
I
even today when I'm walking up here out of town, I walk actually up into a ravine with mountains on both sides. And even
right.
today I get a little creeped out from time to time. So,
It's funny because I keep telling my wife, I say, there's nothing to worry about there. I've been hunting and walking these mountains all of my life, and there's nothing out there dangerous. And she'd always say, well, tell that to Peter if they can ever find him. So she plays, but she plays and she enjoys. So it's funny because I didn't expect this, but yeah, our family, we all jump on the couch. I think even my German Shepherd likes listening to it, but we sit there and
I
listen to
love
about
those
three.
things, and I'm not the only one
Yeah.
out here that does these. I've got my friend Mike, like I said, at Bigfoot's Wilderness. I got a good friend starting up one called Guardian of the Woods.
Okay.
And I've actually got some friends doing, other stuff like sci-fi stuff, UFO stuff. But it's just, for me, it is entertainment. But the other side of everything here at PacWest Bigfoot is this right here. It's those, the experiences, because I think about a month and a half, 2 months before I talked to you, I got a longer report from a gentleman who lives out in Camas Valley. He's a third generation, I think, farmer out there.
Okay.
So yeah, his was pretty darn creepy. It's back there in the new membership section, that the clan that's coming out, and it was just it was pretty intense. So
Something that I did notice, I think I found that one, and I was reading through it. Something I did notice is he is stating, claiming,
mhm,
stating that they travel the Callahan Mountains
yeah,
um, in I think he said the
yeah.
late summer and fall. He says they passed through, and that happened to be when my situation occurred. The
Yeah, see,
exact time.
I lived up San Souci. I don't know if you know where that's at, but
Yeah.
yeah, I lived all the way at the top of that, so I could see whatchamacallit, what's the valley behind there? Starts with an M. Anyways, I could see all that behind there, and there was some weird things up there as well. I ran into two trees that were about, I would say, in diameter about eh, maybe 5 or 6 inches, but they were
Okay.
standing next to each other within about a 3 or 4 foot range. They were both snapped off at the same height and just laying down parallel to
Okay.
the tree. It was really weird, but they were
Huh.
snapped off. They weren't sawed off, or anything. They were snapped off, and they
Okay.
sat in this little dip right there, and they sat right on the side of the dip, growing up out of it.
Okay.
And I did look down that little gully there, and to the side of the gully on the left, you could see where this bramble and bush and stuff like that was kind of piled up in a way with a little opening.
Okay.
And it was pretty weird. Me and my kids got this weird feeling, and this is like literally within about 75 yards of the house. And we were
Okay.
like, let's go. It's time to go. It was getting drizzly and dark, and we were like, nah, this is weird. And before that, we did have some windstorms that knocked over a couple trees, and things like this. But these things, there was no other big trees around them to knock anything off. There wasn't any recent thing to slam into them. We didn't see any other
Right.
debris down there other than leaves and your basic stuff, little branches and stuff. Nothing that was going to snap, 4, 5, 6 inch diameter tree off. And literally, they were actually snapped off at about 8 foot height.
It's one of the things that stands out as not being consistent with the forest around you.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, and I mean, I grew up here. I'm from the Rogue Valley. I've been hunting, fishing, camping. I tell people, you can blindfold me, stick me anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, and I will walk home.
Okay.
I'll just walk home. I'll know right where which way to go.
Okay.
And so for me, it's out of the ordinary stuff.
Well, one thing that I have to say, and this is slightly off subject, the one thing I do have to say about your site is I've been reading, I've been doing a lot of listening, and it's kind of neat because you provided a really neat sounding board for a lot of people, I think, who would normally be a little nervous to tell their reports,
Hmm.
but it's great entertainment, and yet I think it's also a great therapy for others. And
Yeah.
for me, it was interesting because I did see similarities in other reports. So well done for what you've done. I think it's a
Yeah,
pretty neat warm up.
I had similarities in my two incidents that I had experiences with quite a few other people as well. I noticed over time.
Okay.
So yeah, yours on the other hand, no eye shine. The sound, the talking, the
Yeah.
gibberish, that stuff, the size, that all pretty much that coincides with a lot of stuff out here. No eye shine though, and either kneeling or sitting. I have to admit, I've only heard that maybe 2 or 3 times in the whole time I've been, reading about Bigfoot since I was 9 years old. I've only
Right.
heard of that maybe 2 or 3 times, and this is one of them.
As far as
So
the eye shine, I've like I said, I've hunted a lot of animals, and I've hunted a lot of predators as well. And eye shine, um, a lot of times I know that has to do with the angle that the light is actually
yeah,
hitting their eye.
yeah,
They can turn their head just slightly, and you
yeah.
don't see it anymore.
Yeah, and you've got one sitting
But
in a tree line. I mean, it's already got shadow, it's already dark. So what's going to
well,
shine off of the eyes?
yeah, possibly. And um, like it's, for me, I'm probably my own worst critic when I try to. Um, I mean, I've tried to justify this thing away, um, and the more I try to justify things away, and I come up, well, it could be this, could have been that. What I keep coming, I come up with 2 or 3 reasons why it's not that, and what I continue to come back to is it can only be one thing. Um, so it's not the encounter that I had hoped for.
Hmm.
I had hoped for, I had hoped for a foggy tree line, big monstrous figure, wading through the ferns, and just,
Yeah,
but it's not what I had. And
no,
but the width will stay with me. The width
yeah,
and the volume,
nice.
that stays with me.
Well, thank you very much, Donnie. Hold on one second. And I'm just going to kind of wrap everything up with everybody here. And thank you guys so very much for being on here at PacWest Bigfoot in these interviews. As people come forward, like Donnie said, as people become a little less nervous and a little less worrisome about things, and just feel free to open up about them and get here, I will bring these interviews to you guys. Um, so I want to say once again, thank you to Donnie, and thank you guys here at PacWest Bigfoot for being here. So with that, from the beautiful Pacific Northwest and the land of plaid and coffee and PacWest Bigfoot, God bless.